Dear students, welcome to online class arranged by National University. In our today's class, we'll be discussing on Luncheon by William Somerset Maugham. I hope this class will be very helpful for the students, and through attending the classes, students will be able to develop their knowledge on the particular text. As you can see on the screen, that our today's topic of discussion is The Luncheon by William Somerset Maugham. I am Muhammad Ishtiaq Hassan, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Dhaka City College. As you see on the screen, that we'll be discussing on The Luncheon by William Somerset Maugham. This text is set for the Honours Part 1 students for their course Introduction to Prose. And this is one of the important texts, and it is also a humorous text. Students get interest reading this text. The highlights of today's lecture are definition of short story, about the author, about the text, characters, themes, discussion of the text, lecture summary, finally, the questions. Let us come to the definition of short story. A short story is a fictional work of prose that is shorter in length than a novel. Edgar Allan Poe, an American short story writer, in his essay, The Philosophy of Composition, said that a short story should be read in one sitting, anywhere from a half hour to 2 hours. In contemporary fiction, a short story can range from 1,000 to 20,000 words. So from this definition, we can easily understand the length of a short story is not so long. It's a very short in nature. So when we shall read a short story, we'll see these things. It is simple. There will be one incident, a single plot, a single setting, a limited number of characters, a short period of time. So all these characteristics are present in our today's topic by William Somerset Maugham's The Luncheon. So let us see the 5 important elements of a short story. So one of the important elements of short story is character. So we can easily see how characters are important for a short story. Characters are present in everywhere. A character is a person or sometimes an animal who takes part in the action of a short story or other literary work. 1 or 2 main characters may be introduced without full backstories. So it is found that sometimes the background story of the characters is not found. It is only the characters we see the real, not the real story, but the present story about the character itself or herself, himself or herself. And if we go to our next characteristics, we'll find setting. So what is meant by setting? If you see, the setting of a short story is the time and place in which it happens. Authors often use description of landscape, scenery, buildings, seasons, weather to provide a strong sense of setting. The setting is very important in short story. So in this text, we find the setting. And we move on to our next characteristic, that is plot. So through plot, what do you mean by plot? Plot is a series of events and character actions that relate to the central conflict. Short stories typically focus on a single plot instead of multiple subplots. So in a short story, we notice the single plot, not the multifarious plots. Now we move on to our next element of a story, that is conflict. So what is meant by conflict? The conflict is a struggle between two people or things in a short story. The main character is usually on one side of the central conflict. So in short stories, we see all the elements. And the last element we find is the theme. So what is meant by theme? It is better to know about the theme. The theme is a central idea or belief in a short story. Short stories of the past often revolved around a central theme or a moral lesson. Today, it is common to find stories with ambiguous endings. So it means that the readers have to take or to think how the story is coming to an end. Sometimes the writer gives the readers what they will, how they will see the story, the ending of the story. A short story is a short work of fiction, and fiction is prose writing about imagined events and characters. Prose writing also differs from poetry in that it doesn't depend on verse, meters, or rhymes. And we see that novels are another example of fiction, fictional prose, and are much longer than short stories. Some short stories, however, can be quite long. If a short story is a long one, if for example 50 to 100 pages, we call it novella. There is a distinction between novella and novel. So novel is bigger in size. On the other hand, novella is shorter in size. And we know that Edgar Allan Poe was a great writer and made many contributions to the works of literature. He is known as the father of the American short story and also the father of the detective story. Now we move on to other characteristics. We move on to the about the author. So as you see on the screen, this is the image of William Somerset Maugham. William Somerset Maugham was born in 1874 and he died in 1965. He is an English writer of short stories, novels, and plays. He was born in Paris, where his father was counselor at the British Embassy. And we see different moments of his life. Here we find that he studied medicine, but after receiving his degree at St. Thomas Hospital in London, William Somerset Maugham devoted the rest of his life to literature. So a kind of shift we notice in his life. He was a doctor, but he wanted to be a writer, and his interest for literature was very much immense. For his love for the literature, he left his profession of medicine, that is, a doctor. He has achieved success as a novelist with novels such as Of Human Bondage, 1915, The Moon and Sixpence, 1919, Cakes and Ale, 1930, and The Razor's Ace, 1944. And as a dramatist with such plays as The Circle, which was published in 1921, and Our Betters, 1923. But his greatest success has been gained perhaps by his short stories. So there are many stories of William Somerset Maugham, and there is another story, Ant and the Grasshopper. It was also in the syllabus, part 1 syllabus previously. And we move on to about the text in our next slide. So we find from that picture, you can easily understand that what we are going to discuss. So it's a coffee cup, and other things will be also seen in our next slides. The Luncheon by William Somerset Maugham relates about a lady who is an admirer of his stories. She wins the author's favor and expresses her wish to meet him at a high-class restaurant. So we know what actually happened in the life of the writer. It all happened in 20 years ago. The author was living in Paris, and his condition was not so good. At the time, one of the lady guests read about his stories, and she thought that she liked it, and for that reason, she wrote a letter to him expressing her desire to meet him. And we see that she met him at a play and relates to him the incident during the interval which had occurred at the time. She had read a book and had written a letter to him about her views. And the writer's condition was not so good, but he didn't refuse. And for that reason, he and the lady guest were taking lunch at uh, at an expensive restaurant at Foyt's. So he calculated the cost of luncheon, and he thought that it would cost more than 15 francs. He decided to cut down coffee from his menu so he could have enough for himself for the next 2 weeks. The meeting was fixed on Thursday at 12:30 through correspondence. The lady was in her 40s, talkative, and not attractive. She had ordered for salmon caviar while the salmon was being prepared. William had ordered for the cheapest dish on the menu, that was the mutton chop. After the meal, she had ordered for white champagne. She kept enjoying the meal and chatting about art, literature, and music. The lady admirer ordered for ice cream and then coffee, all the same, announcing that she never ate anything for luncheon, just a bite. He was thinking how he could pay the bill. To his utter dismay, the head waiter walked up to the table with a large basket full of used peaches. She picked up one, protesting that her meal was just a snack and that she could certainly enjoy the piece. So the lady guests started eating one by another, and every time she said that she didn't eat more than one thing. But we knew how she ate. So in this text, we find two characters, the lady and the narrator. The lady is one of the important characters in a way that the story has been centered around her. And the narrator is the author himself. We'll see, we'll explore two characters. Let us see about the character of the lady guest. So, the character of lady guest is an interesting character because through this character, we find about the humor and satire and also the irony from lady guest. From the beginning of this story, the lady admirer appears as a pretentious and cunning woman who knows the weak point of a young writer. Her appreciation of the writer's book is actually a cunning strategy to exploit a young man. The writer is easily convinced by her and becomes eager to get her companion. He complies with a request to offer her a lunch at Foyt's, one of the most expensive restaurants in Paris, but his first impression about her is not a happy one. She appears to be a woman of 40. The writer expected her to be young, beautiful, but when he sees her practically, he develops a repulsive feeling towards her. Besides, she is a talkative lady and always talks nonsense. So we can say that it was a kind of excuse for which she came to meet him and wanted that luncheon there. And it is found that she appears that she doesn't understand anything, but as the story goes, we can see what really happened actually. The lady guest is one of the significant characters in this short story, and we see that she is not only a pretentious woman but also a glorious liar and master in the art of convincing a young man. The writer is startled to see the high prices of the bill of fare, but the lady takes him not to be worried and assures him that she never eats anything for luncheon. The generous writer tells her not to say in that way. Taking the opportunity, she says, I never eat more than one thing. But contrary to her declaration, she consumes more than half a dozen items of costly foods and drinks, much to the annoyance of the writer. Her hypocrisy becomes apparent when she criticizes people for eating far too much nowadays. Her behavior is noticed in her waving the waiter aside with an airy gesture and tactfully expressing her desire for eating asparagus. I should be sorry to leave Paris without having some of them. The manner of her eating the asparagus in large, voluptuous mouthfuls undoubtedly proves her gluttony, one of the seven deadly sins. At the end of the story, the writer expresses gratitude to his lady admirer. He is not a vindictive man, but he feels happy to see the lady being punished by the immortal gods for her voracious eating. After 20 years, he finds her at a theater, and this time she is a very fat lady weighing about 21 stone. The writer gets his revenge at last. And the next comes to our narrator, and the narrator is the author himself. And from the text, we can easily understand the narrator is a very simple man. And at the very beginning, we also find that he was so young to say no to a woman. So we saw this what happened when she when he said no to a woman. And one of the themes of this text is appearance versus reality. This is very important, and it is found that the apparently the lady guest is saying that she doesn't eat anything, and she says this as an excuse of continuing the talking. The reality is quite different. So in reality, it is found that what she says is full of lies. And it can be said in that way that the way she is behaving uh, in this way is not right. And we find that the speaker in the luncheon wishes from the beginning that would be a beautiful woman. But the reality is quite different. The writer thought that it would be a beautiful woman, but when the lady comes to him, he found that uh, she was a, she was a woman of 40. And there are also other things we find. There is a conflict between appearance and reality. Her appearance, but there is a conflict between her words. To that, she doesn't eat too much. But when it comes to eating, she orders one after another, being of higher social standing and wealth, for which the narrator had to pay heavy cost. And the narrator knew that he can't afford eating at an expensive restaurant, but when he was praised for his writings, he could not refuse the lady guest. So this text is a humorous story, and we also find the irony, and at the same time, the Appearance and reality is also found in this text. The appearance is misleading, so it also expresses through this text. Satire and social humor. So it's a satire that the writer uses humor and irony to depict the character of the woman. So we can see how it is projected in that way. So if we can find out how the writer talks and the way he was treated in this text also is shown by the writer in a humorous way. In his writing, Mom exposes and criticizes the woman for her greed for food and ironical talk. In the story, the woman is depicted from the first instance as a humorous and ironic character. The narrator meets the woman who is 40 years old and takes her to a very expensive restaurant. And the restaurant, the narrator who appears happens to be 20 years old, pretends to be courteous, sophisticated, and gentlemanly. Mom depicts the humor in the excuse, I never eat more than one thing. And the habit of the woman as well as the response of the narrator. The narrator takes the woman whom he had never seen or met before to an expensive restaurant called Poets, a restaurant reserved for senators. With little information about her, he takes her to one of the expensive restaurants in Paris, and the woman exploits him mercilessly by ordering expensive meal and pretending that she loves his writing, and she never mentions. The poor author, like many young men, is unable to request her to stick to his budget, and therefore all he wishes is that she does not spend more than he can afford. Otherwise, he would be forced to leave his watch as security and bring the money later. It is ironical that the poor narrator had never gone to the hotel on his own, but with the company of this woman. He was willing to sacrifice his monthly income to please her. Ironically enough, the woman eats some expensive foods, while the poor author only takes a mutton chop and a cup of coffee, which was the most cheapest dish on the menu. Unknowingly, the narrator responds generously, expressing his disappointment. The woman says that she does not eat more than one thing and ridicules that people eat too much nowadays. However, she proceeds to order for fish, salmon, caviar, champagne, asparagus, and finally ice cream and coffee. So she eats a lot of foods at the expense of the writer. And because of that, the condition of the writer becomes so bad. But at the end of the story, we can also see what actually happened in the life of the writer. Knowing his financial situation, the narrator could only order the cheapest dish on the menu. The narrator makes it humorous and ironical when he says he does not take champagne because his doctor had told him not to take champagne. The reader knows that the narrator doesn't have enough money to meet such a high bill. He suffers inside, but he cannot speak. More humor comes out when the woman is asked if she would want an asparagus. The narrator asks the waiter if they had any of the asparagus. The narrator had always admired the asparagus on the shop's display and his mouth watered for their sight. But he didn't have the money to buy because that was very expensive. The asparagus appeared, they were enormous, succulent, and appetizing. The smell of the melted butter tickled the nostrils of the virtuous cemeteries. I watched the abandoned woman thrust them down her throat in large voluptuous mouthfuls, and in my polite way, I discoursed on the condition of the drama in the Balkans. At last, she finished. So this was the quote from the writer. The writer was expressing her condition. In reality, he had never eaten them. However, not that he didn't love them as the woman understood, rather, he could not afford their price. So, he was so poor that he lived in a tiny apartment in the Latin Quarter and earned barely enough to keep his body and soul together. So, humor is everywhere, humor and irony is everywhere in this text. And through this humorous story, the writer tells us about the condition of the lady guest, and the condition of the writer is not so good to bear all the expenses. And we find the sufferings of the writer. What did happen to the writer? The writer wasn't vindictive, but he got his revenge at last. So how did he get his revenge at last? We'll see that. And if we just talk about the sufferings and the exploitations, we can say that the luncheon focuses on the miserable conditions and exploitations and tribulations of young writer by the lady guest. Through a flashback, the writer goes back to a past incident when he had to suffer a lot because of a lady who praised one of his writings. It happened 20 years ago. He was living in a small apartment in Paris with his poor income. Once he got a letter of appreciation from a woman who wanted to meet him and have a chat with him at a restaurant at Poets. When the writer was startled to see the high prices on the bill of fare, the lady assured him, saying, "I never eat anything for luncheon." We see that the writer was upset to see the lady being tempted to the asparagus as they were presented by the waiter to be large, splendid, and tender. The lady's tactful discourse compelled him to order for asparagus. The writer was panic-stricken and he thought that he wouldn't be able to pay the bill, and he has a whole month ahead of him. And he thought that if he is unable to pay the bill, he will keep his watch and later he will take his watch paying the money. So it was the very crucial time for the writer because his condition, his economic condition was not so good, and he didn't think that he had to pay a lot of money for the bill. The lady's tactful discourse compelled him, and after this voracious lady ate one after another, and lastly she ate ice cream and coffee. At last she snatched a piece absent-mindedly from the waiter's basket during her conversation and began to chew it. This rude behavior of the lady was beyond all etiquette, and it shocked the writer greatly. The writer became penniless, and he would have to starve for the rest of the month. So we see that the condition of the writer became deteriorated because of that money spent for the lady guest. And we know about the revenge of the writer. How did the writer get his revenge? So this is also interesting fact about the revenge from the lady guest. We see that she became a bulky woman, and at last the immortal gods helped him in a way that was beyond his imagination. And we know what happened to her and what was her condition. The narrator tells us that he had his revenge for the luncheon ordeal. The lady weighed 130 kilogram, and her weight is said to be 21 stones or 294 pounds. So that was the condition that the writer saw in the theater, and in this way he thought that he took his revenge. So we find that this satirical story, through the presentation of humor and irony, we see how the lady guest uh, exploited the writer. And also the interesting thing comes out at the end of the story, that how the lady guest become so bulky and she becomes so obese, which made her look ugly. And we move on to our next slide. So, lecture summary. In the very beginning, we have seen the writer's condition, the food habit of the lady, how much she ate, the sufferings of the writer, and the revenge of the writer. So all these things have been presented in this summary. And as we know that so William Somerset Maugham had a great mastery over his writing, because he became a man of the world. He traveled all over the globe looking for interesting characters, and from his observation at different places and different times, he gathered his ideas. He was in his time, he was the successful writer. His readers also enjoyed his writing because he shares his curiosity about human nature and his love for faraway places. In the luncheon, the reader has the feeling of having visited one of the best Parisian restaurants, and perhaps even having sampled some of the best French cuisine. And we also see that the condition of the lady guest. And the interesting fact happens when you see the obesity of the lady guest. We are moving towards the questions from this text. For short questions, these questions are important for the students. How did the lady admirer contact the author for the first time? How did she manage a trait from the author at Poets? Question number 2, I never eat more than one thing. How far is the utterance of the lady true? Broad questions. Describe the ordeal the author goes through while entertaining his lady admirer at Poets. Or how was the writer exploited by the lady guest? And the final question is, sketch the character of the lady guest. Dear students, we have come to the end of our today's discussion, and hopefully the classes will be very helpful for you for your better understanding. And one thing that you need to keep in your mind while you're writing the answer of the questions, please make sure that you're writing in the correct way, because whenever you write, your writing should be correct. And if you write something which is not the correct English, you will not get marks from that. And before writing anything, first make a plan, and you will just go according to your plan, so that your writing will be full of good information, and also it will fulfill the necessity requirements for answering the board questions. So thank you for your time for attending the session, and we'll be doing the next class with you on a different topic from introduction to prose. Till then, goodbye.